Alright, welcome to part 3 of this video series where we're going to be going over the spline process. I left off last time with blocking being at the story blocking phase. So the first part of this video I'm finishing up blocking and then moving into spline. Right now I'm just kind of biting off smaller chunks. This scene is only a couple hundred frames, so I think I just divided it in half and just try to go through and focus on the breaking down the root and footsteps first, and then adding in the little details on the arms. So for example, like with the story pass and blocking, the hands in particular I have just kind of coming together to say that he's kind of clapping, and then in this stage I literally will add the clap breakdowns so that when I go into spline I'm not necessarily doing that in spline. I'm trying to creatively decide what is happening when at this point with poses that I'm keying, and then a lot of that's there already in spline, and it's just refining that timing, making sure that the easing in and out is doing what I want it to do. You can kind of see right now, based on the graph editor, I'm still in stepped mode, and just thumbing through the keys that I have to try to come up with the breakdowns that I need. There were more at the beginning and kind of into this big hop that I felt like I needed to have in there, just because it felt like as soon as I switched to spline that could get really soupy really quickly. And so one way for me to try to control that a little bit and stay really intentional is to try to add the breakdowns before consciously switching into spline. So in my head, when I'm in this stage, I'm trying not to spend too much time thinking about the graph editor yet. I'm still really trying to look at the poses and the spacing between the two extremes. So that's why a lot of the time I'll kind of thumb back and forth between the two keys that I have. And for me, especially like at this point in the shot where he's doing this big action, I know that I want the biggest gap of that hand arc. I know where I want that to happen, and so I can really drag that arm right now and kind of wrestle with how many frames I have here, and it's already solving a lot of problems that if I had just set a key with his arm down and a key with his arm up and switched into spline and left it, there's a lot there that then Maya is just making it all even. And so it's harder to tell if it's just the arm or if his root is also having too much space, and so I just need to close how many frames are on all of the controls, or if it's literally just that, oh, I have his arm going up too soon, so I just need to move the keys on the arm controls a little bit forward. By just thumbing through the keys, I can sort of wrestle with that a little bit more here and try to find out which controls are actually affecting it a little bit easier. It just kind of helps me to stay more focused on what is working and what's not working, as opposed to just having it in Spline and hitting play and watching the playback over and over to try to see what's not working. So I find that adding as many breakdowns as I do really helps later to clean up the graph editor. When you do move into Spline, you'll be able to spot some of the keys on controls that are out of place based on the arc, and you can see in the viewport what you were going for because you have so many breakdowns, and then be able to make a better adjustment in the graph editor to push and polish the decisions that you've already made, rather than trying to make a pretty graph but then not necessarily knowing what you were trying to accomplish in that section, or having to then counter animate what you did in the graph editor so that it looks like what you wanted it to again. And like you can see now, even just by glancing at the graph and clicking on the various controls, I can see some of the curves that are not. It lets me see keys that are out of place in an area that I want to be fluid, and also calls out areas that I might need to manually set keys on every frame for that portion of time. So as I get into this run here, there's a big change in his foot, and so I switch to Spline to kind of see what Maya is thinking, so that I can potentially just adjust 2 keys and maybe add 1, so that Maya can fill in the rest in a way that works. And so kind of switching back between Spline and stepped in this section to see what the keys look like that I'm keying, and making sure that silhouettes are still working well, but then also checking to see, is this gonna help Maya fill in the gap, or am I creating a section that then I'm going to have to, if there's a way that I can avoid having to key every frame to get through a big shift and a big shape change, then I want to try to do that. So those are the types of creative decision making that by kind of consciously switching back and forth between spline and stepped, or just thumbing through the keys and leaving the graph in spline. It does help me stay in a more conscious and analytical frame of mind as I'm setting keys. And then this part of the run, I really focus on the contact poses and passing pose, and try to get those keyed in a way that as Maya fills in, and I just know that I can, once I'm in spline, I can play with those curves as needed so that it stays really fluid. By pushing those 3 poses and adding a breakdown between them, so 5 total poses, I'm building that arc already, so that then when I go to clean it in spline, it's just adjusting, if needed, it's adjusting the curve of the 2 betweens, seeing how much to push that. So after adding all of the breakdowns, this is what I would consider final blocking pass. And then so that you can see what having that many breakdowns does, immediately after is a play blast of just switching the keys from step to spline. So after I feel like I've got all of the breakdowns that I need, I switch into kind of a spline polish mode, where I first focus on the root and spine of the character, making sure those curves are fluid and working the way that I want them to. And sometimes those changes make the arms and legs a little bit hard to look at. So some rigs let you hide those, and sometimes that's really, really helpful. But in this case, the changes didn't affect it too much. Basically, it was just a little bit of the translation for where the feet were falling got affected during the run. But for the most part, I was able to just leave them visible because it wasn't too distracting. But I will usually focus on the cog and spine, including the head. First, I spend most of the time cleaning that up and making sure that the shape changes there are working and that the spacing is what I want it to be. And then I will move to usually the feet, and then I tackle the arms and hands last. So in Spline, what I trying to do is look at the curves of each controller, the rotation and translations, and just see which areas are not it. By having all these keys, you can kind of see stair steps, and or if there's something really out of place, the key you'll get kind of a mountain or a spike, and so the first thing I'll do is move the timer, or I'll move the timeline to that key, thumb through, because especially in this shot with some of the cartoony big changes, those mountains are going to happen, and it's okay because I either have keys on every frame for that section to try to make sure that it's blending okay, or it's just a really big change in the shape, and so it's going to happen. But for the most part, I'm trying to look for those, because it's just an opportunity to have some nice eases in and out of transitions, as well as just making really fluid arcs and things like that. And because I have the breakdowns that I do, the number of breakdowns that I do, I'm feeling pretty comfortable with where the peaks are happening. While I am pretty confident of the general shape of the curve, I do still try to keep the timeline and scrub through as I am adjusting the curve to make sure that the changes I'm making are helping and doing what I want, just as a double check. I don't blindly just click on a curve and say, oh, it's not super smooth, so I need to smooth it out. I try to still thumb through each frame and look at the character and what he's doing, where he's coming from, where he's going, and make sure that I adjust the curves accordingly. And it's just really important to keep the performance in mind through the entire process. And again, with Splined, I am just working through the shot. In this case, it wasn't super long, and so I just would start from frame one and move through the sequence, and whatever frame range you're kind of comfortable working with, or the complexity of the shot. Sometimes when it's really complicated, I'll just try to work in like 50 frame segments and just polish either the entire character, or just usually what I'll do is like try to tackle the cog or the root and spine, and just take small chunks through it if it's really complex, and just polish 50 frames on those two aspects, make sure that those are working, and then once they are, move to the next 50 frames and clean that up. And that will just, depending on how many controllers you're polishing, that's a way of keeping it really manageable, so that you can just kind of work your way through the shot. And then once I finished the root and spine, I went back and went to the legs, and in this case I was even adding like the footfall at this stage, and foot roll, making sure that the foot was on the ground when it needed to be, and for you know, the 2 or 3 frames that it's rolling into when it's off of the ground, making sure that that's right and that there's no penetration through the floor or anything like that. And so just by breaking up which controls I'm working through and also how many frames I'm trying to tackle on each controller, those are ways of keeping the work really manageable so that you keep moving forward. And once I worked through that, I have my final spline pass here. And then next time I will be talking about what I did to polish up the shot and show a final render of this sequence. So I'm really excited to share that, and if you like this video, please let me know, or if there's other videos or topics, I'd love to get some ideas on other videos that might be helpful. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.